Thank you for joining us for EMBCA's Sack of Constantinople and Latin, Frankish Greece, 1204 to 1566 panel discussion. My name is Lou Katsos, and I will be moderating today's panel. Our distinguished panelists include Professor Constantine Hatzidimitriou, Professor Ilias Giarenis, Dr. Nikos Nikoloudis, and Professor Johannes Niehoff-Panagiotidis of the Freie Universität Berlin. The Sack of Constantinople in 1204, 820 years ago this year, during the Fourth Crusade, is one of the most significant, controversial, and pivotal events in medieval history. This event not only marked the decline of the Byzantine Empire, but also had profound repercussions throughout Hellas, as Latin powers established themselves in various regions, fundamentally altering and reshaping of the political and cultural landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Crusaders laid siege on the city, which fell after a brutal attack on April the 12th of 1204. The sack was characterized by extensive looting, destruction, and atrocities committed by the crusading forces, including the desecration of churches and holy relics, which shocked and alienated the Eastern Orthodox Christian world. It led to the establishment of the Latin Empire, which was centered in Constantinople, encompassing Thrace and Bithynia, and created as the successor state of the Byzantine Empire after the Fourth Crusade. Of course, the Byzantine Empire, fragmented into Epirus, Trapezusta, and Nicaea. It was eventually captured by the Empire of Nicaea under the rule of Michael VIII Palaeologos in 1261. In what is now Greece, the Latin conquest led to the establishment of various Latin principalities and duchies, fundamentally altering the region's governance. The most notable of these was the Principality of Achaia in the Peloponnese. And this principality became a prominent Latin state governed by Western feudal principles and integrated into the broader Latin Christian world. Others included the Duchy of Athens, the Duchy of Naxos, or the Duchy of the Archipelago, the Kingdom of Thessalonica, the County of Salona, now modern Amphissa, the Marquesate of Bondonitsa, and many others. There were also significant Latin colonies, among them being the Genoese colonies that included the Lordship of Chios, numerous Venetian colonies that included Crete, the Ionian Islands, and various Venetian coastal fortresses in the Peloponnesus and mainland Greece, and again, others that were established in the aftermath of the Fourth Crusade. The Latin occupation of these territories after 1204 left a lasting legacy, and which in some areas lasted a very long time. It contributed to the fragmentation and weakening of Byzantine power, which facilitated the eventual Ottoman conquest of the region in the 15th century. Culturally, the Latin presence introduced Western European influences, particularly in architecture and feudal organization, which persisted even after the restoration in some areas of Byzantine rule. The complex interactions between Latin and Hellenic populations during this period also left a lasting imprint on the region's religious and social fabric. The Sack of Constantinople and the subsequent Latin Frankish occupation of Greece is one of the most amazing, consequential, as we indicated before, and in some ways, the least known periods of Hellenic history by most people. I'd just like to show just briefly some maps, again, just very briefly, so everyone can understand what was taking place over a period of time. These particular maps are from one of my favorite books by William Miller, Latins in the Levant, and they indicate some of these principalities that we talked about The first one is from 1214. And again, just take a quick look at that. The second one is from 1278. And again, you see the changes of different areas. The third one is from 1388. And notice the Serbian taking over certain areas, like in Thessaly, for example, that's shown on this particular map. And the last one, of course, from 1462, when a lot of the areas, obviously in mainland Greece, were under Turkish occupation, and in the fall, certainly in 1460, of the Despotate of the Morea. I'd like now to introduce our panelists one by one, who will give their presentations, and then we'll open it up again to the whole panel in an open discussion. Our first panelist will be Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou. Constantine holds a doctorate in Byzantine, Ottoman, and modern Greek history from Columbia University. He was a Giarenis Fellow of the American School in Athens and an educational counselor at the U.S. Consulate in Thessaloniki, where he also served as a professor at Anatolia College. He is currently the managing editor of the American Journal of Contemporary Hellenic Issues, the Journal of Modern Hellenism, and he's also a research associate at St. John's University in New York City. Dr. Hatzidimitriou is also the author of 3 books: Navios, The Future, Built Upon a Historical Tradition of Innovation and Excellence; American Accounts Documenting the Destruction of Smyrna; and Founded on Freedom and Virtue, Documents Illustrating the Impact of the United States of the Greek War of Independence, in addition to many articles that he has written in scholarly journals in the fields of Byzantine and modern Greek history and education. In 2022, his book on Smyrna was updated and published in modern Greek. He currently is working on a new book on the American Philhellenes during the American Revolution, and another one on Central Greece during the Byzantine and Ottoman periods. Welcome, Constantine, Costa, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Lou. I probably should have you cut that introduction. It's kind of long.
It's okay. It's okay. You're great.
I'm delighted to be here with such a distinguished panel group. As you indicated, the Latin conquest was arguably the most catastrophic event in Byzantine history and perhaps Hellenic history in general, with profound ramifications. I asked to speak first because I'm very interested in how my views are seen by my much younger and distinguished colleagues, who I'm sure will share many profound insights based on their own studies. Before turning to my own work on the subject, done about 40 years ago now, it was my dissertation, which it'll give you some idea of what I'm going to talk about. The title is The Decline of Imperial Authority in Southwest Central Greece and the Role of Archontes and Bishops in the Failure of Byzantine Resistance and Reconquest, 1180 to 1297. But before I go into those details, I want to discuss and make some general observations about my understanding related to 1204 based on the most recent literature. First of all, let me say that increasingly 1204 and its impact is no longer a neglected subject. And we have many recent studies, as well as a journal devoted to it called Frangica, linked to a rich website sponsored by the French School in Athens. In fact, I understand they have a GPS, a GIS, or a map, which you can click on and get all kinds of archaeological data and articles, etc. It's something that I ran across just in preparing for this presentation, and I haven't studied it carefully, but I think it's a wonderful resource. Additionally, the study of the Crusades, all of the Crusades, has become kind of a cottage industry with its own websites, conferences, publication series, not to mention TV programs, such as those on the American History Channel, which often, I am sorry to say, gets most of the content wrong. I was surprised by one sponsored by the Smithsonian that deals with the Crusades and doesn't even mention Byzantium. How can you talk about the Crusades and not mention Byzantium? But they managed to in that particular program. It also comes up in studies focused on the interactions between Islam and the West. And the definition of the West often does not include Byzantium as well in these interactions. Recently, an important and interesting study by Professor Dimakopoulos has appeared, which highlights that the Latin conquest was actually the first example of Western colonialism, involving cultural subjugation and political economic dominance, and it observes that it fits almost all of the modern criteria used in studies of modern Western imperialism, colonialism, etc. Very interesting, slim book, but lots of interesting stuff in there. The conquest has also been increasingly highlighted in studies related to the continuity or discontinuity of Hellenic identity, as well as symbiotic relationships between conquerors and the other, the creation of hybrid identifications. Here I'm thinking of Vakalopoulos, among others. Kaldelis recently on many others on identity. On the subject of why did this crusade turn against fellow Christians, instead of focusing upon its stated purpose of liberating and defending the territories in the Holy Lands created by earlier crusades, this is a debate that has been going on for a long time and has also resulted in hundreds of studies on various topics. In summary, it seems to me that there are two broad categories of thought. Now, this is my categories, ladies and gentlemen. One I call the conspiracy theory, that argues that it was intentional from the start and part of the agendas of several key players, such as Venice and various leaders like Boniface and others, with close ties to Byzantine aristocrats and economic interests. And then there's what I call the accidental theory, which argues that circumstances led to an opportunity for conquest that were not part of the organized plan, especially since the Crusaders themselves were not a united group, and that they even had their own internal rivalries and divergent interests. One group, for example, sailed directly to Syria and did not even go to Constantinople. My own view is that both concepts are correct and played a crucial role, since there have been a centuries-old economic and cultural Western penetration by Western powers such as Venice and others, and marriage ties at the highest level between Byzantines and the Latins, and settlements of large numbers of Westerners within the empire that led to hostilities between the groups, both religious and political, and rivalries that were economic. This familiarity between them fed greed and opportunism. As one scholar has observed, Shawcross, whose work I admire a great deal, even at the outset, Villehardouin, an important Western chronicler, reported that, and I quote, the decision to divert from the original route was a decision inseparable from a desire for territorial gains, end of quote. And that a crusader returning also from, she makes from Villehardouin, from this observation, a crusader returning from Syria who encountered the fleet on its way from Constantinople, jumped ship and joined Boniface, again, the quote, because they were likely to win lands for themselves, end of quote. Clearly, there were both external and internal problems that led to the Latin conquest. The two most important internal factors were imperial instability and civil war, which resulted in the overthrow of Isaac Angelos, with the result that his son Alexios fled to the west and asked for aid and crusader intervention, in the capital to restore him. And the second was the focus of my own research, which I identify as the decline of Byzantine central authority and the rise of the power of local archontes throughout the empire, a process that began well before 1204. I also spent some time explaining how these local archontes used their titles and offices to usurp central authority, to levy taxes, and oppress local inhabitants using legal mechanisms called pronias and episkepsis, which enabled them to be more independent and participate in commerce. Security in southern Greece also suffered, especially with regard to piracy, which increased and took its toll on coastal communities. These factors also came into play as the invaders progressed. As a result of the breakdown of central authority, the Latins encountered little organized resistance as they occupied areas beyond the capital, with the exception of Asia Minor. In my study, I identified this centrifugal aspect, which I called localism, a phenomenon which remained in place for the remainder of Byzantine history. This fragmentation of imperial authority led to the establishment of separatist principalities, both Latin and Byzantine, some of which survived beyond 1453. In order to test this thesis, I studied the regimes of Leon Zgouros, who became the semi-independent ruler of portions of central Greece and the northern Morea before 1204, Michaelangelos Doukas, who established a separatist state in Epirus and Akarnania during 1204, and his successors, and Boniface of Montferrat's creation of his own semi-autonomous kingdom in Thessaloniki, which expanded southwards into central Greece and the Morea and came into conflict with the other two. Now you can throw the map up, Costa. That way people don't have to look at my face while I'm going through the rest of this. Another factor of my study was, and here the purpose of this is just so you can get a sense of the geography and how things were broken up. Another focus of my study was to determine how the decline of central authority and localism impacted the relations between archontes in central Greece and Epirus and local bishops, as they were both confronted with chaotic and severe changes resulting from this decline and the Latin conquest. In order to do this, I focused on the documents of Michael Choniatis, the Metropolitan of Athens, who opposed Zgouros and eventually Boniface, and Ioannis Apokafkos, the Metropolitan of Nafaktos, who supported the Epirot separatist state and the Duke and opposed the Latins. Time does not enable me to go into great detail, but let me summarize the results of my 40-year-old research, which I believe agree with the classic study of Judith Perrin and the more recent studies by scholars such as Savidis, Kordosis, Shawcross, Locke, Anagnostakis, and Angold, just to name a few. By the way, I still highly recommend what you've already mentioned, the very well-written and dramatic accounts by the great William Miller on Frankish Greece, which, although old, still contain valuable insights and material. I always learn something new when I reread them. The archontes and ecclesiastics of central and southern Greece were faced with one of three choices when confronting the Latins: resistance, accommodation, or flight. There were certainly regional variations and lots of chaos as Boniface invaded from the north, and Godfrey de Valdran, who found himself by accident along the southern coast of the Morea, invaded from the south. Both were aided by local archontes, whose behavior, as reported by both Latin and Greek sources, which remind me of, was very similar and remind me of an American game show which the Americans on the audience, hopefully some of them will remember. It's called Let's Make a Deal. This is how Nikos Nikoloudis, one of our best Byzantine sources, described the situation. Let me grab my dissertation here. This is from Nikoloudis when he's talking about Boniface coming down into the south. He was accompanied by certain Romans, especially men of noble birth, who by deceit and cunning decoyed the provinces and smoothed the rough ways. Ostensibly in the name of Maria's firstborn son, attired in imperial vestments and acclaimed in procession, he was warmly received by the Macedonians, the Thessalians, and all the lands reaching down to Hellas, as was the case earlier with the Thracians. In truth, these men were precursors of the Marquis and the Latins who proposed what course of action should be taken and were but panderers of their country. End of quote. And then elsewhere he makes the following observation. As though they were their patrimonial properties, a band from Champagne and a small company of Latins divided among themselves Athens, Thebes, Euboea, and the lands around Methone and Patras. Their former lords were content to submit in disgrace and revilement without feeling any prickling of heart or quitting themselves like men for their own sake or for the sake of their children. Neither were they impelled by their own accord by a spirit of freedom, nor did they show much resolve later. They were those who were consumed by burning ambition against the interest of their own country, servile men, corrupted by wantonness and other senseless actions, who took possession of precipitous fortifications and fortresses and walled cities, where they had established wretched tyrannies, tiranias, and whereas their duty was to take up arms against the Latins, they set their faces against one another and surprisingly made peace with the Latins. End of quote. Villehardouin was assisted. It's pretty clear what the view of Nikoloudis, Nikoloudis was, in the reality as he saw it. Villehardouin was assisted by one of his countrymen, William Julien Champlet, who eventually also became the Prince of Achaia. In the entire affair, they were supported by Archontes, whose support was crucial. In fact, even Michael Doukas, who later ruled Epirus and Acarnania, joined Boniface at first and only broke with him later on as opportunity presented itself. The Latins took advantage of local discontent with the Byzantine Central Greek authorities and government, and varied their behavior to confirm local rights as it suited them, and played one side against the other to minimize resistance. Where loyalty to the imperium seemed strong, Boniface in particular took advantage of his ties to the Angeli. He had married Isaac II's widow, and as Kyriantis points out, and the Latins divided up their conquered land into fiefs and introduced Western patterns of landholding, laws, and even jousts into Greece. Initially, they let many of their Byzantine collaborators keep their lands and bestowed many rights and let them keep certain rights as fief holders at the lower level of their hierarchy, a situation that changed for some of them over time. Only two archontes, leaders, led significant large-scale resistance to the invaders. A certain Michael, who may have been Doukas, we don't know, who led a force in the Morea in the northeast of Messenia at a place called Kundura during the summer of 1205, and Leon Zgouros in the northern Morea and Napoleon in Corinth. Michael was defeated by Wilhadwan and Boniface's forces, and Boniface's forces were defeated at the Isthmus, although he held out in his strongholds at Acrocorinth, Argos, and Napoleon. Parts of Laconia and the stronghold of Monemvasia also resisted. And somebody who Lou is very fond of and would be annoyed with me if I don't mention, a local archon named Doxa Patris Bucharas, who the Chronicle of the Morea says put up a stiff resistance in his castle in the central Morea, which he resisted for decades. And the Chronicle of the Morea speaks very highly of him. And by the way, we know where the castle is, Lou. Maybe we'll take a visit to it at some point. By 1212, however, much of the entire Morea was under Latin rule. Zgouros was eventually defeated and died fighting heroically, either in Acrocorinth or Napoleon in 1209. The story that's most often repeated is that Zgouros, rather than be captured, committed suicide. He went onto his horse and rode it off of the walls of Acrocorinth and committed suicide. Savidis, in a very interesting article, points that to other references that indicate that he may have left Acrocorinth and went to Napoleon and left there and died in a sortie against the Latins. I think it was Napoleon that he went to. Yes, I think it was Napoleon. But what happened in central Greece? In central Greece, the role of Michael Choniatis, the Metropolitan of Athens, proved decisive, as did the behavior of churchmen elsewhere. It is clear that Zgouros, despite that he held a high Byzantine title and that had some local support, he held the title of Sevasto Hypertatos, and we have his seal, it survives. He even married the daughter of the fleeing Emperor Alexius III and obtained the title of Despotis, that he alienated the church. Even before 1204, he came into conflict with the Metropolitan of Corinth. And you can't make this stuff up, ladies and gentlemen. He invites the Metropolitan to dinner, ostensibly to make amends. Let's get along and be friends. And as they're having dinner, the report is that he blinded him and pushes him off of the walls of Acrocorinth. If you've ever been to Acrocorinth, you'll appreciate the visual of what those walls are like. When Boniface invaded southwards, Zgouros had taken over most of central Greece, including Thebes, and the lower parts of Athens. Its metropolitan, Michael Choniatis, refused to surrender the city to him. He knew what he did to his colleague, and he had come into conflict. Heron has lots of interesting things to say about Choniatis, among others. And he led resistance to him from the Acropolis, where the Parthenon was his cathedral at the time. Zgouros took Choniatis' nephew, I think his name was George, and made him his servant. Later on, Choniatis in his letters relates that he murdered the boy in a fit of rage in his castle because he broke a cup while serving dinner. Tells you something about Zgouros's, despite his heroic stance, some of his character. By contrast, when Boniface came to Athens, Choniatis surrendered the keys to the city and at first tried to accommodate the conquerors. His rich and extensive letters indicate that he both encouraged other clerics to come to terms with the Latins and also to resist, depending on circumstances. Again, like the American TV game show, Let's Make a Deal. And there's a very recent study of in French that I haven't had a chance to read yet. It looks very detailed about the monasteries under Latin rule, which I'm sure will add a great deal to our knowledge. I also argue that his letters indicate to me that he ran kind of a spy network, because what he did was he wrote to laymen and clerics in areas both inside and outside of Latin control, in Epirus and Acarnania, as well as to the Patriarchate in exile in Asia Minor. Like his counterparts elsewhere, the church took on the role of protector and continuator of Byzantine culture, and took on many functions of the local administration and tried to act as a kind of a buffer between the Latins and local populations. However, he eventually fell out of favor with the new regime and had to go into exile. The letters and legal decisions of his colleague Ioannis Apokafkos, who remained free in Naupaktos, indicate that the church expanded its jurisdiction after 1204, even trying cases of murder, and was crucial in supporting the legitimacy of the rulers of the separatist state of Epirus. Time does not allow me to discuss the relations of Apokafkos and the fragmentation of the separatist state of Epirus under the various ducae. Suffice it to say that localism and a balance between Archontes and the church played a crucial role in its survival. Finally, I wish to call attention to the striking similarities between the Latin and the later Ottoman methods of conquest in southern Greece in the late 14th and 15th centuries. Once again, localism and the decline of central authority, civil war, and archontes all aided the invaders. And the church also played a crucial role. For example, in central Greece, in the Latin principality of Salona, Amphissa, it was surrendered to the Ottomans by its bishop because the bishop hated his Latin ruler. It should be noted that the hardening of anti-Latin religious feeling played an important role during both the earlier period and the later period. Like the Latins, the Ottomans exploited Byzantine disunity and were aided by local archons and clerics who were promised protection and guarantees of their rights. Collaboration and deal-making were the order of the day again, with the result that local Latin and Greek aristocrats were initially incorporated into the ruling elite as what were called timarios, a status that once again changed over time. I think that a comparative study between the two conquests would be very illuminating. But this is a story, ladies and gentlemen, for another time. And I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Constantine, for that. There's a lot of things I'd like to say, but I'm not going to say too many things. I will say that I do agree with you regarding the fragmentation, and we'll discuss that later. But also in the work of Peter Locke more recently on the Franks in the Aegean, 1204 to 1500, he also goes into that fragmentation process, exactly what you were describing in your study when you were doing.
I mentioned Locke.
Yeah, you did. I will say that the Archbishop of Athens hated Skouros. There's no doubt about that. And I just want to mention Dandolo of Venice, because I like to say to people, which is true, when I visited Hagia Sophia the first time and every time since, I go to the balcony of Hagia Sophia and I spit on on his tombstone, which is there. With that, I will introduce Professor Ioannis Giarenis. He was born in Athens. He is a Byzantinist, professor of Byzantine intellectual history at Ionian University. He is also a member of the governing council of Ionian University. He has written on the Empire of Nicaea, on the Empire of Trebizond, and the fragmented Byzantine world after 1204, on the Holy Face, and on the Byzantine author and clergyman Nikolaos Mezaritis. He has co-edited collective volumes on the scholar and Cardinal Bessarion, and on scholars and scholarship in Byzantium. He has also co-edited the honorary volume Books and Learning in the Byzantine World in honor of Professor Kostas Konstantinidis. And he has taken part in many international congresses, colloquia, and conferences in Greece, in Cyprus, in Italy, in Croatia, and Hungary. His current research interests include Byzantine scholarship and education, the world of manuscripts in Byzantium, and the reception of Byzantium in modern and contemporary Greece. Welcome, Ilian. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a great honor for me, and we have already seen many things through the important speech, the important paper by Kostas Hatzidimitriou. I'll try to give some glimpse, to give a glimpse on the Fourth Crusade and see whether crisis, the notion of crisis, can be implied there. In spite of a great number of important publications, the Fourth Crusade and its impact in the Eastern Mediterranean are often, even nowadays, neither fully apprehended nor sufficiently explained. Important aspects of the rich scientific debate still are the collapse of the Byzantine state, the formation of smaller political entities, and the processes through which such immense changes took place. The events of 1203, 1204 led to the conquest of Constantinople by the Latin Crusaders, the Milites Christi of the Fourth Crusade, who had reached the Byzantine capital in a diversion from the declared original destination of the crusade, Jerusalem. The latter, a sacred city for both Eastern and Western Christendom, had been recently reconquered in 1181 by the Sultan Saladin of Egypt. The crusade had its origins in 1201 under the spiritual guidance of Pope Innocent III. Interestingly, the diversion to Constantinople was not the first one for that crusade. The events which took place in late 1202 in Zara had somehow shown the immediate future of the military movement. The background of the actions on the spiritual and ecclesiastical sphere were naturally associated with the schism between the Eastern and the Western Church, and with the multifaceted actualities of the Crusades movement, its visions, targets, versions, diversions, and practices. I'm going to try to shed some light to certain aspects of the major crisis which was dominant in Byzantium before and after 1204. In fact, the crisis presented symptoms in all the spheres of life, political, social, religious, scholarly, and intellectual, and had a huge impact in the subsequent life and action on the lands, which were until then included in the territory of the Byzantine Empire. In that perspective, one should bear in mind that the notion of crisis is a general and rather hard to define category, with sometimes unspecified causes, and the remedy to a crisis, and I would like to underline this, the remedy to a crisis can often present vaguely declared goals and ambitions, or even real intentions circumstantially distinct from the propagated ones. In the framework of the Fourth Crusade, a lot of noblemen, especially coming from the regions of Flanders, northern France, and Germany, had taken the cross and undertaken the task to fulfill the pious goal of liberating the whole land from the hands of the Seljuk Turks. For a better understanding of the political, social, and military data of the era, one should bear in mind that at the beginning of the 13th century, Crusader states had already been founded in the East and had functioned as hybrid states from a political, social, and ideological point of view. In 1201, the Crusader army was assembled in Venice with the declared destination of Egypt. But the Venetian chief, the Doge Enrico Dandolo, already mentioned, put a first, as it was to prove, diversion of the crusade as a precondition for the transfer of the Crusaders to their declared destination. The station, the so-called station, which the Crusaders were pressed to make, was Zara, modern Zadar, Dalmatia, which had recently rebelled against Venice and had subsequently renounced the sovereignty of the King of Hungary. The Crusaders had to accept the Venetian offer since there was no realistic alternative. As a result, Zara was besieged and conquered in November 1202, whereas looting and ferocities also did happen. By that point, an urgent crisis on the Holy Land, which was calling for immediate and effective action, had resulted in the conquest of a city whose control Venice intended to regain. Byzantium subsequently provided the Crusaders with a highly attractive motive or alibi for a second diversion on the ground of another crisis, which was also existent and crucial at that very era, and was evident both in the capital and in the provinces of the Byzantine Empire. That crisis had its roots on the political and economic weakening of the Byzantine Empire, which had been gradually intensified and somehow maximized during the reign of the Angeli emperors from 1185 onwards. However, the main causes of the gradual economic downfall of the Byzantine Empire had been effectively present and apparent from the end of the 11th century onwards. The overall fiscal policy of the Comneni emperors, and especially their practice of granting tax privileges to the Italian maritime powers of the era, contributed to a situation where Byzantium was weak and was also always further impoverished in that competition. It had thus been led to the position of a state which desperately needed assistance from the West to confront the dangers and threats its opponents, its rivalries, presented to it. The assistance Byzantium received from the West to deal with an urgent problem gradually led to the further deepening and consolidation of the crisis, and to a situation in which the state had almost entirely lost its economic and military integrity. What was left to happen was the complete loss of its political entity, and that occurred in 1203, after a respective call for action from a player in the internal Byzantine system of political controversy and balance of the era. His name was Alexios. He was the son of the former Byzantine Emperor Isakios II Angelos. Alexios had been able to flee from Constantinople on a Pisan boat, heading to the west, and soon called the Crusaders to help himself and his father to re-establish themselves on the throne of Constantinople. The Byzantine prince at that point attempted to persuade the Crusaders, making the promise that he would provide them with substantial grants and profits if they helped him re-establish himself on the Byzantine throne. Vast amounts of money, the church union, and the supply of a Byzantine army for the continuation of the crusade were among the rich and generous promises. Those consequently led to high expectations for the Crusaders. The traditional position and identity of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire were not incompatible to that. Nevertheless, in all those estimations, the existent crisis, which had radically changed the economic and social data of the empire, had been either neglected or underestimated. Thus, the fierce internal political competitions and fractions led to a management of the existent Byzantine crisis, which promoted the Crusaders as a vital force that would hopefully solve the problem and smoothen the situation. The political and military step that was eventually decided and put in action was propagated as a temporary diversion of the crusade and a cure for the problems of the empire. Nonetheless, that very step was to further deepen the already existent crisis and also consolidate the sharp political, cultural, and religious rift between East and West as practically irreversible. Until May 1203, the Crusaders had come to an agreement to make that diversion the second one in their movement. Their march now seemed to have actually taken the shape of a zigzag, wherever wealth and interest called. On the 24th of May 1203, the Crusader fleet departed from Venice. 1 month later, the Pope sent a letter to his Cardinal Legate, Petro Capuano, to express his anger and despair for the Crusaders' decision for diversion to the Byzantine capital. In June 1203, he also wrote immediately to the leaders of the Crusaders and actually forbade them to head towards Constantinople. The Crusaders traveled and came to the port of Abydos. From there, the view was a magnificent one. According to the first-hand testimony of Robert de Clary, the Crusaders regarded the great size of the city, which was so long and so wide, and they marveled it exceedingly. Departing from there, the United Crusader fleet passed by and made port at Chalcedon on the Sea of Marmara. The Byzantine navy was at that time in a really disappointing condition. Only 20 ships were now in the emperor's availability. Furthermore, their condition was not the best possible. When the Crusaders held a part of the walls of Constantinople, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios readily abandoned the city and his power, taking along with him a part of the imperial treasury. The crisis was again transformed, taking an intense social aspect. Fires burst out throughout the city, destroying church and secular buildings alike, depriving many of the inhabitants from their properties and leaving many families homeless or in a need to move urgently. The Crusaders tried to control the political situation in Constantinople, and such an evolution was believed to have been accomplished when the Latins reinstalled Isachius II as a nominal emperor and Alexios IV Angelos as a co-emperor and actual ruler of the empire. Nevertheless, the political crisis was not over. The heavy fiscal burdens which were imposed by the new rulers rapidly made them highly unpopular to the subjects of the empire. A contestation led to their dethronement and the ascension to the throne of another emperor named Alexios again, Alexios V, the so-called Murtzouphlos. Alexios immediately initiated anti-Latin military expeditions, since he saw them as a political opponent of his power and his empire. He demonstrated bravery and strategic skills, but on February, the loss of the miraculous icon of the Panagia Nikopios, Theotokos the victory giver, led to a collective psychological trauma. An iconic icon, as I like to call this icon, an iconic icon of Theotokos, now fell on the hands of the opponents, and soon a conviction spread throughout the inhabitants of the city that the victory was now to be given by her to the Crusaders because of the Byzantines' sins. Apart from beliefs and convictions, the Crusaders saw things more practically. They had a quite easy choice to make. One possibility was to leave Alexios, a declared enemy of theirs, to the Byzantine throne, and head to the Holy Land. The alternative was considered much more attractive. An attempt to conquer and rule the Byzantine Empire for their own sake and interest. Acting towards that perspective, they took care to divide all the lands of the empire following the treaty called Partitio Terrarum Imperii Romaniae. And according to that, a Latin emperor and a Roman Catholic Patriarch of Constantinople were to be established in the city as soon as the targets of the Crusaders were achieved. On the 13th of April 1204, the Crusaders conquered and sacked Constantinople. That proved to be the starting point for the establishment of the Latin Empire of Constantinople. Furthermore, decisive steps were made for the intensification of fragmentation on the lands, which were until then either part of the Byzantine Empire or had not yet been definitely separated from it. Apart from that, beside the Orthodox Patriarchate of Constantinople, a Latin one started to exist and competed, or rather tried to substitute it in its ecclesiastical and ideological functions. And I remind what we have already heard on colonialism. The Orthodox Patriarch had to flee and find temporary shelter in the Demoticon Thrace, and his successors had Nicaea as their actual seat in exile. That city was of great religious value as the place where the first and the last ecumenical councils had taken place, according to the Orthodox Christians' counting, of course. As an outcome of the Latin conquest, a new, deep, and rapidly expanded crisis emerged throughout the capital and other cities on the lands of the former empire. The latter's political death provoked an immense shock and further deepened the crisis. It now took the characteristics of a major social and humanitarian crisis with important and critical political, economic, and demographic aspects. Furthermore, the symbolic and ideological value of the conquest was immense. What proved to be the decisive, though certainly not the final, conquest of the city also determined substantial data in religious, intellectual, and artistic spheres. The Byzantines were steadily considered by the Westerners as schismatic, and that perception facilitated fierce, ravage, and cruel behavior during the 3 days of the sack, which had been unfolded in the city. Works of art, icons, and relics had been destroyed or grabbed to be eventually moved to the West. But the people also suffered from the conquest. Many Byzantines were killed in Constantinople in the summer of 1204. Women were raped, children were tortured or killed. A substantial part of the city's populace had to leave their fatherland and try to move to more remote areas where there was a hope for the establishment of independent political life. Anti-Latin sentiments were common to wide parts of the Byzantine people. The traditional misunderstandings between the two worlds now met the wild behavior of the conquerors and the deep trauma of the Byzantine people that now felt even more like the new Israel. The actuality and the experience of the exile urgently asked for a vision of the return to the lost paradise, a reconquest par excellence. That reconquest of Constantinople and its hinterland constituted the raison d'etre for the Empire of Nicaea until 1261, when it was eventually accomplished. It also played an important role in the construction of politics, diplomacy, and ideology in the state of Epirus and the Empire in Trebizond, which both nevertheless continued to act after 1261 as rival states to the re-established Byzantine Empire. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ilia. The icon that you were referring to, is that the one in St. Marcos now?
Sorry, I couldn't hear well.
The icon that you referred to, is that the one in St. Marcos now?
Yes, there is this supposition, there is this theory that this is the one, Panagia Nikopios.
Yeah.
We're not sure there, though there's not a consensus in other researchers, but this is the main theory.
Okay, and thank you for discussing Zarro also, and also the Dodge of Venice, Dandolo, who obviously in many books, was the person that they claim was the one that put the scheme together on the basis of getting back payment for the ships that they built for the Crusaders who didn't have the money to pay for the ships. So thank you for all that. Our next presenter is Dr. Nikos Nikoloudis. He's an author, historian, and independent scholar. He obtained his PhD in the Department of Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies at King's College in London. He is the organizer of 3 one-day conferences, participant in 2 research programs, and 17 history conferences. He has authored 14 history books, 3 jointly, and has written, obviously, many articles. He is the editor-in-chief of Historica Themata, a monthly Hellenic historical journal from 2001 to 2010. Nico is also the author of 5 collected volumes, including a dictionary of Byzantine on the Byzantine Peloponnesos and the Hellenic, and 12th volume of journal Mesoios under the title Byzance. And also the question of Asia Minor in the eyes of foreigners, which he wrote in 2023. His areas of research includes geographical, military, and socio-political history of Greece, Southeastern Europe, and the Middle East. He is the host of a webinar, History Without Blinkers, broadcasting Greek every second week. Welcome, Nico, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you too, Lou, for your kind invitation. I would like to focus on a different aspect of the conquest of Constantinople in 1204, which will deal mostly with the presence of the 2 major Italian maritime republics of the time, Genoa and Venice, who benefited either directly or indirectly from the conquest of Constantinople. And as a matter of fact, the 2 dates that you have set as the beginning and the end of the period to examine are the ones that are directly related to the rise of Venice, the 1204, which was a peak perhaps of its successes, and the end of the downfall of Genoa in the Aegean in 1566 with the loss of its last colony, which was Chios. But I'll cover the topic in broad lines by pointing the major dates, which will help perhaps our audience to understand this process. And perhaps I can expand later on the discussion on side issues. So, starting with Venice, let's remember that in the first place, it was a valuable ally of the Byzantine Empire in the early and Middle Ages, in the area of the Adriatic and the Central Mediterranean, especially in the struggle against Arab pirates until the late 10th century, more or less. And it was for this reason that Emperor Basil II, the famous Bulgar slayer, granted Venice commercial and other privileges in the area of the Byzantine Empire in 992, followed much later in 1182 by Emperor Alexios I of the Komnenian dynasty, who expanded these privileges in many areas of the empire, covering Constantinople, Corinth, Halmiros in Thessaly, and so on. However, by 1171, that is about less than 50 years or so from the Sack of Constantinople, Emperor Manuel I, the Comnenus, expelled them from Constantinople because they had already become too strong and competitive towards the Byzantines. And that led, of course, it was a strong motivation for the involvement and the redirection of the Fourth Crusade to Constantinople, as has already been pointed already, by the then Doge Enrico Dandolo, who is also supposed to have been, or rumored to have been, blinded during one of the Venetian skirmishes against the Byzantines in earlier years before the sack of 1204. The fact is, though, that right after the sack, we have the first Latin patriarch, Thomas Morosini, of Venetian origin. He was made the patriarch because there was a deal, apparently, between the Crusaders and the Venetians that if the former took the political power by creating an empire and having an emperor of their choice, then the Venetians would be allowed to have the religious power in the conquered territories, and that was the outcome after all. On top of that, however, Venice was the main beneficiary of the conquest, as it was granted the large sections of the Byzantine Empire, including in the Peloponnese the two eyes of Venice, as they were called, in southern Messenia, that is the cities of Methoni and Koroni, the island of Crete, which was actually taken over in 1211, a few years later, other parts of the empire, such as sections of Constantinople, the many coastal cities in Propontis and Thrace, and many Aegean islands, which were sort of franchised, if you like, to Venetian vassals, aristocrats who took them over as personal fiefs, but under the authority of the Venetian state. And also one of the major places that was taken by the Venetians was the part of the island of Evia, then called Negroponte, as also including the modern town of Chalkis, also called Negroponte at the time. Of course, as we know, the Constantinople was reconquered by the Byzantines in 1261, and that led to a significant loss of influence over the sea trade, especially of the Aegean, by the Venetians, and which lasted for quite a long period, about 50 years. It took, we have to go to reach 1328, when balance was reached in the new Byzantine Empire of the Paleologi emperors between Venice and Genoa, with the then emperor granting them both equal privileges, more or less, so that he could balance the one against the other. Nevertheless, the process of encroachment of both these republics over Byzantine territories and interests was very strong and intensive, to the point that we come to 1376, when they clash over the island of Tenedos, which is strategically situated at the entrance of the Dardanelles, still under Byzantine territory at the time, but both these republics wanted it for themselves, and in the end they decided amongst themselves, without really considering Byzantine rights over it, to neutralize it and leave it empty, so that none of the two would be able to take it over at the expense of the other. Venice was still able, though, to make progress by taking over for just a short period, really, about 7 years, the second biggest city of Byzantium in Europe, Thessalonica, and that was a peaceful, taken over peacefully as a grant, really. following the will of the last Byzantine despot, Andronikos Palaiologos, one of the second son of the Emperor Emmanuel II, and one of the last band of brothers, literally, who ruled the empire. Anyway, so we come to the last siege of Constantinople in 1453, where Venice actually plays a major role in the defense of the city, because the Venetians were the strongest foreign element which had interests invested in Constantinople as such. And it's significant to know that many of the gates of Constantinople at the time were assigned to Venetian nobles living in the city, including the Venetian bailo Girolamo Minotto. Most of them were arrested, taken prisoner during the Ottoman conquest and executed. That was really the beginning of the downfall, in my opinion, of the Venetian presence in Greece, which of course lasted many centuries until 1715, essentially. However, it was a series of losses, territorial losses, starting from right after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, with the first Venetian-Ottoman War, when Venice lost the cities of Argos in 1463 and Negroponte in 1470. In the second war, Venetian-Ottoman War, which followed soon afterwards, between 1499 and 1503, it lost Lepanto, Naupactos, and as well as Methoni and Koroni, all of them in 1500, sorry. And the third war, within the context of our time frame, which lasted between 1537 and 1540, led to the more significant losses of Nafplion, Monemvasia, and some Aegean islands like Andros, Paros, and Santorini, Naxos temporarily. Of course, as we know, Venice kept big islands like Cyprus and Crete, as well as the Ionian Islands, which were lost much later on. But as I said, this was an irreversible process of decline. What you need to remember at this stage, before I move to the second city, Genoa, is that as it appears on the map, the conquest of Constantinople in 1204 led to a split of the Aegean between these two powers. I mean, as it turned out, Venice became the dominant power in the western side of the Aegean, on the Greek side, if you like, on modern terms, including some of the islands. And as we shall see, Genoa took over a large part of the eastern side, the Asia Minor coastline, not all of it, and many of the northern Aegean islands of East Aegean. But let's start for Genoa again from the time when it really started making a presence in its presence in the Byzantine Empire. The Genoese were latecomers compared to the Venetians. They only made a strong presence in 1155, in the year when Manuel I Komnenos kicked out temporarily the Venetians from Constantinople and granted the Genoese privileges to balance the former Venetian influence, considering them a very natural ally against Venice, since Genoa and Venice were competitors and opponents throughout the Mediterranean at the time, trying to dominate the Levantine trade from the Middle East to Italy. More privileges were granted to the Genoese in 1201, just a few years before the sack of 1204. Of course, the Genoese were losers in the events of the sack of Constantinople. They didn't have any participation in this process. However, they compensated, if you like, at the end of this short period throughout which Constantinople was held by the Latins, because in 1261, the year that Constantinople was recaptured or liberated, if you like, by the Byzantines of Nicaea, they had managed to make to sign a treaty with the Byzantines of Nicaea just a few months before the actual recovery of Constantinople, which would allow them more access to the Byzantine territories for as a result of their potential assistance, naval assistance for the Byzantines, which didn't materialize in the end, but still the grants had been given. So the Genoese started creating a set of colonies throughout the areas that were then under this Byzantine control, the most important of which was the neighborhood, the suburb, if you like, of Constantinople, the Pera or Galata, modern Galata in Istanbul, and another set of colonies in the Danubian Delta, in the Crimea, with Kaffa and Sugdea being the most important colonies, as well as a local colony in the city of Trebizond. The major colony in the Aegean at the time was Chios, which was a natural port, if you like, at the time, because let's remember that in 1402, the invasion of Tamerlane, the famous conqueror in Asia Minor, resulted, among others, in the destruction of Smyrna, the port of Smyrna. That indirectly led to the rise of Chios as a commercial center, because all the trade from the inland of Asia Minor and the Middle East that was directed to the Aegean coastline shifted from Smyrna to Chios, which was a safer place and under Genoese control at the time, temporarily at first between the years 1304 to 1329, and more permanently from 1346 to 1566, which is the end of the period under examination here. Chios was also very valuable for the Genoese because of the mastic, which is a unique product in the Aegean and one of the spices in the Mediterranean, which was very valuable in the Middle Ages. So it was held, especially in the later period, by the Giustiniani family, as we know, which was more, if you like, of corporate name than a family name at the time. It was a name taken over by all the members of the clan, if you like, the commercial clan that constituted the owners of the shareholders, if you like, of the company that ruled Chios. So Chios was one of the major colonies, as I said, in the Eastern Aegean. The second major colony was Lesbos, the island of Lesbos, which was held by the Gattilusio family, another Genoese family, between 1355 and 1462. And the Gattilusi had also control over the two towns of Phocia, the old Phocia and the new Phocia, as would be called today, in the coastline of Asia Minor between Chios and Lesbos, which was very useful because there were alum mines there, and alum was the product which made the purple dye at the time in the Middle Ages. Plus, the Gattilusio took control eventually, not by arms, but by intermarriages with the Paleologos family, whom they served as allies at crucial periods. So they were allowed the control of the North Aegean islands of Thasos and Samothraki, as well as the coastal town of Enos on the Turkish side of the delta of River Evros, or Maritsa, as is best known, which had rich salt beds. very useful and handy for the trade of the time. These were the major areas. Also, the Genoese controlled apparently for at least for some period Samos and Icaria on the East Aegean, all the major islands. But the major contribution, apart from all these events that I mentioned, was again in the last siege of Constantinople in 53, sorry. Let's not forget that the major contributor to the Byzantine defense at the time was a Genoese from the Giustiniani family, Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, who held the crucial part, the crucial gate of Saint Romanos, and whose fatal wounding and early departure led to the collapse of the defense. He was the leader of an elite corps of 700 strongly armored Genoese mercenaries who held that post throughout the siege until the last day. Another interesting point, and I'll finish my presentation with that, is that another less known Genoese family held another crucial part of the walls, the Kerkoporta, which was another place from which the Ottomans entered Constantinople. And these were the Bocchiardi brothers, three brothers, Paolo, Troilo, and Antonio, whose troops forgot the door, forgot to close the door as they were returning from one of the exits, commando exits, if you like, to hit the Ottomans, and allowed some Ottomans to enter the city from there. Interestingly, and this shows very characteristically the relationship that not just this family, but in my opinion, all of these traders, as well, the Venetians as well as the Genoese, how they viewed their presence in the Levant, and especially the Aegean area, is that although one of them was taken prisoner and executed, that was Paolo, one of the other two surviving brothers, Troilo, who died in 4079, in his will, he left 500 lire for the liberation, for the organization of a crusade to liberate Constantinople. And that same person, before he died, also did business with the Ottomans throughout the remaining years of his life. So that shows this, if you like, conflict of interests. I mean, the personal sentiments of this family vis-a-vis the commercial interests that they had, shows the contradiction of the presence of the Latins in this in the Aegean and the wider Greek lands of the time, and perhaps an indication why in the end they failed, along with the rest of the Frankish rulers, by not being able to perhaps make a strong point as how they viewed their presence there. Anyway, that's a bigger issue. Perhaps we can talk about it later, but thank you for your patience, and I'll be glad to answer any comments or questions.
Nico, thank you so much for that. And it just reminds me, you mentioned certain dates which were very interesting, obviously, 1715, as we know, which was the second conquest of the Morea, or the Peloponnesus. But part of the reason why the Ottomans conquered it the second time and was made easier is because the Venetians were better tax collectors than the Ottomans were, and the Hellenic inhabitants, quite frankly, preferred to have the Ottomans, come back in. The other
let me just add one more thing. The last bit of Greek territory that was held by the Venetians was not the Morea, it was the island of Tinos, which was had to be handed over as a result of the last Ottoman conquest of the Peloponnese. So it's again significant that the Aegean was the focal point of interest
Well, there's no doubt about that, and you did mention, of course, like other people did, 1251, and besides obviously Constantinople, the Palaiologoi also went into Laconia and that area, captured a large component component of that. But for the audience, it's very interesting that among the mercenaries were actually Turkish troops. Okay, they were also mercenaries, which Palaiologos ended up not paying, which became another problem. But we're not going to go into that right now. So I'd like to introduce now our next panelist, Professor Dr. Johannes Niehoff-Panagiotidis. He is a Byzantine scholar, and since 2007, a professor of Byzantine studies in the Institute for Greek and Latin Philology at the Free University of Berlin. Yanya was born in Germany to an Istanbul Hellenic family. He has been a professor or visiting professor at the University of Tübingen, Freiburg University, the University of Mainz, the Faculty of Translation Studies, the Central European University in Budapest, and again from 2007 at the Free University of Berlin, where he was also the Vice Dean of the Department of Philology and Humanities, and from 2007, a professor of Byzantine Studies. He is the author of numerous articles and books and has been an academic advisor. Since 2015, he has taught regular courses in Greek theology and its Arabic translations at the University in Qom in Iran, and in Farsi. And he has been a principal investigator together with Dr. Izbebski of a DFG-funded project on climatic history of Byzantium in Macedonia and Turkey at the Max Planck Institute in Jena. Since 2018, he has been the editor of a series of late antique Christianity with Georgios Press in London, and also continues to teach various courses in classical and Byzantine Greek. From 2019 to 20 at the German Orient Institute in Istanbul, he has been a guest professor for a research project on Karamanlinika, which appeared as a blog. His funded research projects and awards are many, and include in 2021, 2022 at the German Orient Institute in Istanbul, again as a guest professor for a research project on the oldest Ottoman documents preserved on Mount Athos, which is now being transformed into a book. Welcome, Yanya, and thank you for being with us today.
No, well, thank you a lot for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here again. I hope everybody can hear me. First, I would like to ask Konstantinos Margaritis for the PowerPoint presentation, for the maps. Maps are always good. No? So, no, for the third part you have already seen. So you see here how the enormous extension of the Byzantine Empire. No, and interestingly enough, now by my predecessors, we heard a lot about what happened to Greece. No, but the Byzantine Empire, even in the Middle Byzantine extension, includes a huge part of the Balkans and of Asia Minor. Can we see the next one, please? Yeah, no, you see, about Greece, I think we have spoken enough. But let me begin with the relations to the Eastern neighbors. No, with the Fourth Crusade, the whole of Southeastern Europe and Asia Minor enters a definite phase of instability. No, the Byzantines before 1204 had somehow found their way of living with the Seljuk Empire in Asia Minor. This had come to a stalemate. No, you conquer this castle from me, I conquer that city from you, but there was no thorough progress on both sides. With the Fourth Crusade, all this becomes unstable. Even in 1243, the Seljuk Empire, with its capital in Konya, former Iconium, after a heavy defeat against the Mongols at Kösedag, enters a phase of instability. So the Byzantines, the empire of Nicaea, one of the three main parts of the former Byzantine Empire, which was ruled by the Byzantines themselves, had to give up any attempt, which was the motto of the day since the Comneni, to reconquer Asia Minor. Trapezund, where, as we have heard by Dr. Nikoloudis, was definitely split from the body of the Byzantine Empire and became, until the fall of the city, in fact, for 10 years longer, completely independent. But in this power vacuum, you had the Empire of Nicaea, which then reconquered Constantinople, which is true, 1261. You have the kingdom of the Seljuks of Rome, who become petty, actually puppets in the hand of the Mongols. And this is a prolonged death until the beginning of the 14th century. This is the occasion for the Ottomans. The Ottomans rose in this borderland between the splinters of the former Seljuk kingdom, they call them in Turkish Beylik, and the remnants of Byzantine domination in Asia Minor in the region between Brusa and Nicaea, Iznik. So without this fragmentation of power, which we have heard already, but which is also valid for Asia Minor, where the Latins were present. We have heard about Smyrni, we have heard about Chios, even on the other part of Chios, you have Phocia, you have Chthonies, Ivali, where the Genoese were selling alone and so on. This is the basis for the rise of Ottoman power. Without the Fourth Crusade, there is no Ottoman Empire. How much the Ottomans took from the Latins, especially from the Venetians, is open to debate. We know that Mehmed the Conqueror had, for example, in his architectural taste, as you can see in Topkapi Saray, he had stronger inclinations to Venetian architecture and art than to Byzantine. The Byzantine tradition was for the Ottomans somehow their tradition. But Venetian art, including literature, you have even a Latin epic on Mehmed the Conqueror called the Amuris, from the Amir, the Emir, like Ilias and Aeneas and so on, which is preserved. So the personal taste of most of the Ottomans, even up to the 19th century, where you have a lot of Italian architects working for the Ottomans, even in Thessaloniki, even in Istanbul, of course. You can look to Saint Antoine, was Italian, especially Venetian. In the end, especially after the second part of the 13th century, the war for the reconquest of the Byzantine Empire is an equilibrium between the power of Venice and a bit Genoa and the rising Ottoman power. And this goes up to the end of the 18th century when Venice disappears. Next point. The Latin. This map more or less, you know, especially in the western part, the Latin domination. The interchange of cultures in the Latin territories, which we have heard now, gives the possibility of the rising of a new group of people who had Greek as their mother tongue, but were of Catholic confession. No, you can call them in Byzantine Rasmuli, or you can call them the Franks of salty water, no, because they come from the Aegean. No, all examples of early modern Greek literature, which is written in an early form of Demotiki, come from these Frankish territories, which have been mentioned by my distinguished predecessors. The Chronicon Tumoreos, of which we have a Venetian version, an Old French version, and we have also an early modern Greek version. But the whole style of the work, a chronicle for a dynasty, the dynasty of the Villers-Ardois, is of Western, actually of French inspiration. This is a Western work in the Greek language. Nobody knows which is the original. All the other examples, the theater, the Cretan theater, the sacred place of the Chios, up to Dionysios Solomos, who was the son of a Venetian nobleman from Zakynthos, Zante, are all written, when they were written in Demotic Greek, by members of these Catholic Greek speakers, who were also strong in Istanbul. They call them Franco-Levantini. Next point. So this is a very interesting origin of what we call normally modern Greek literature. The closest parallel is what happened in Lebanon. Even the Lebanese Maronite Arabs begin to write. This is the only Arabic group who give up the Katharevusa and write the Lebanese dialect, sometimes even in Latin characters. The original of Hortazis is in Latin characters, which is the famous manuscript kept in Birmingham. It is Cretan dialect in Latin characters, or the Aerophili. So, what happens on the Western side? If you look, or if you master the sources, we have heard about Villers-Ardois, we have heard a bit about Robert de Clary. If you compare this to all the older sources, on the first, second, third crusade, Odo de Deuil and all of them, in comparison with Western historiography on the Fourth Crusade, they have all something in common. Up to the Third Crusade, including the Third Crusade, they are all written in Latin. Beginning with the Fourth Crusade, all these European invaders, Geoffroy de Villars-Ardois, who is the founder by his nephew of the Principauté de Achaia, and also Robert de Clary. They all write in Old French. So the Fourth Crusade was for the French conquerors. Even the Venetians write in what you called Italo-Französisch, a mixture between Venetian dialect and Old French. This Fourth Crusade must have been for the rising self-confidence, for the question of a Western European feudal identity, a crucial event. Only one, Gunther de Paris, who was a clergyman, and he was not an eyewitness. His abbot was an eyewitness, his abbot Martin. He's the only one who, on the Western side, who writes still in Latin. So for the development of Western European French chivalric literature, this is also a very important event. Now, what we have heard, if there was a master plan. If you read old French literature, for example, the epic, which is much older than the Fourth Crusade, on the pilgrimage of Charlemagne to the Holy Land, which in fact, of course, never did take place. No, this is fiction. You see already in 1112 early French, actually old French chivalric epic, the idea that the Westerners are the true heirs of old Rome and not the treacherous Byzantines. So the Fourth Crusade was prepared ideologically centuries before the Fourth Crusade really happened. And there's one epic which is famous among specialists in French by Chrétien de Troyes, Chrétien de Troyes, which is called Cligès. And if you look at this name, so the hero, Cligès, is a mixture between a Turk and a Westerner. And this is of course fiction. The whole story goes about that the Byzantines are the traitors, and the Western knights who passed through Asia Minor, through the Holy Land, for going to the Holy Land, they had to pass from Angira, from Konya, whatsoever. The Westerners should better keep peace and accept the Muslim Turks because they are the better human beings than the treacherous Byzantines. So this is end of the 12th century. So this was written in Champagne, where also the first Guillaume de Champagne, the first knight, the first leader of the Fourth Crusade, was from Champagne. He died on the way and he never saw Constantinople. But this is the ideological preparation for what happened later. Now, next point, the question, and I'm thankful to Professor Hatzidimitriou that he mentioned this, the question how much this conquest of the Byzantine Empire can be called a predecessor of much later colonialism. No, you can argue that, for example, Columbus was a Genoese, no, and he had first fought in the Mediterranean, and so on. But the decisive, what you normally read, is that there is a difference between the Crusaders and their conquests and early modern colonialism. So, for example, in the Americas, in Africa, and so on, in the sense that the medieval conquest never brought big masses of Western European population to the conquered countries. And this is, at the first sight, this is true. No, there was not a big Genoese immigration to Chios. There were at the most 20 families, and that's it. But this is only at first sight. In reality, there is one region of Greece where the Venetians behaved like the conquerors after the discovery of the Americas, and this is Crete. The Venetians gave a big part of the land of Crete, actually at least 1/3, to jobless and poverty-stricken Venetian colonists who got a land share. So this works almost like the Dutch and British colonization centuries later. Now, if this is true, and I think it is true, then the First Crusade is really a prelude to later Western European colonialism. Now, the indigenous population in Crete, where they were put down to a semi-colonialized status, they had minor rights and so on. And what happened later, so with the American Revolution, that the former settlers, who settled in the US at a certain point with the War of Independence, declared their independence from the motherland, against George III. The same happened also in Crete. The Venetian colonialists, at a certain point, this is a famous rebellion of the Venetian colonialists against the mother country, which then was extinguished by the Venetians. So the last question, this was already said, but I would like to stress it to a high point, is they are our Greek sources. You would expect at first sight that we have a lot of Greek eyewitnesses on this. But if you look closer, you have only two. And this is Nikitas Choniatis and this is Nikolaos Messaritis. And if you look closer to Nikitas Choniatis, and I confess that I have 15 years ago written a long article on Nikitas Choniatis, is that during writing, he stopped or had to stop. His life was difficult with the Fourth Crusade. His work to retake it again, to rewrite it again. So this is normally hidden by our modern editions, and especially by the quite bad American English translation by Maroulias. In the end, if you look correctly, you have not one historiography by Nikitas Choniatis, but you have 4. And at a certain point of his work, Nikitas breaks off and says, until now, Greek historiography, so this is an age-old Greek historiography in the classical tradition of Herodotus, Thucydides, and Polybios. The only subject for Greek historiography are the Greeks. Now I, the poor Nikitas, I have to write about barbarians. And the interesting is that in these few lines, he does not say, and normally he says for the Byzantines, of course, Romei. In these 5 lines, he goes back and writes about Ilias. So with Nikitas and the catastrophe, the sense that the empire is lost irretrievably, also the old sense of being Hellenes and not Romei, because Romei is linked to the Roman Empire, of course. So there is a direct line from Nikitas, who also describes the statues of the pagan god. There's a direct line from Nikitas to Gemistos Plithon in the 15th century, who also has the idea of re-establishing a Greek state and to get rid of the Byzantine past. And this is also at the root of Icosiana, of the beginning of the Greek Revolution, or the eternal conflict in Greece between being a Romios or an Elinas. No? No, from my family, no, thank you, Louis. No, from my family, I learned from my family that we are Romei, but not Hellenes, no, because the Istanbuli Greeks did not accept this. No, and also with Messaritis. Messaritis is a very interesting author. I fully agree with Professor Giarenis because he breaks with the traditions of a linear narration. No, his work is stylistically difficult and is a voluntary rupture with traditional methods of narration. No? But this I had to. This is what I had to say. No, the Fourth Crusade is the beginning of the long rollback from Byzantium to modern Greece. So far.
Yanya, thank you for that. Let me ask you a question. In terms of the Chronicle of the Morea, there was a version, I believe, also in Catalan. Is that correct?
Now this is Aragonese.
Ah, Aragonese. Oh, okay.
Now Aragonese is actually this is as usual in Spain a very much debated problem of Spanish local identity. No, you should, or one should distinguish between the Reino de Aragon, which is the traditional landscape of Aragon, with the center of Zaragoza, and the Condado de Barcelona, which is at the core of which is today Catalonia. But with the fusion of these two principalities into the Reino de Aragon, the old Aragonese dialect almost disappears. So the language of the Reino de Aragon was Catalan. But we are here in the 13th century, about 1300, maybe a bit earlier, when the old Aragonese dialect was still used. So Aragonese is much closer to Castellano than Catalan. No, for Aragonese, you don't need a training. For Catalan, you need a training. No, the other one who translated from Greek into Aragonese, who is the point of much of proud of modern Aragonese, is Juan de Heredia, who was the Grand Master of the Knights of Rhodos, who translated Thucydides into Aragonese. So every proud Zaragozano is very happy about Juan de Heredia because he used that. But this, for practical reasons, if you want to read it, this is Spanish.
Oh, very, very good. Because in the past, someone had asked me, "Can I get a copy of the Chronicle written in?" Well, they said Catalan, and there is one copy. There was a copy at one of the libraries here in New York, actually, the Spanish Museum and Library. It's on 150th Street in Manhattan. I just thought that was a very interesting scenario. Now, let me just ask one question, a simple question, and then we'll open it up for everybody because you guys have all types of things you've been discussing, and there's so much interesting things to talk about. The word Byzantine, the word Byzantium, and I think Jan, you actually mentioned it. It was like a curse word in the West in terms of how they used it. And they in the English language, the word Byzantine, the original meaning of Byzantine is a very nasty particular thing. And obviously when somebody
also in German.
Okay. And when somebody wrote about it in, I think it was the 15th century or what have you, and then over time it became, just a standard word for the so-called, continuation of the East, of the Roman Empire. What are the thoughts by historians? And again, I don't want to go into this too deeply. What are the thoughts about the continual use of the word Byzantine?
Now, this is a classical, you call it in Germany, a Wortgeschichte, no? Historia Lexios. Actually, the first one should know is that the Western Latin historiographers. For example, Otto von Freising, who was the uncle from maternal side of Frederick Barbarossa. He was Bishop of Munich and Freising. And he wrote a world chronicle where he describes, for example, Emperor Manuel Komnenos. But for all these writers, the Byzantines are not Byzantines. Byzantium is for them an antiquarian expression for Constantinople, like for the Byzantines too. Byzantios exists, but Byzantios means Constantinopolitis. No? So in this they coincide, but for the Western historiography, the Byzantine Empire was not the Byzantine Empire. Emperor Manuel was for them, so already before the Fourth Crusade, the Rex Graecorum, the king of the Greeks. And Rex, king, in this context is pejorative because it denies to the Byzantines the status of a Roman Empire. And for the humanists, no later in the 14th, 15th century, for the Italians, there was this was the same. They had no distinguished idea of a separate Byzantine Empire. No, all these refugees, high cultivated men like Chrysoloras and the others, they were all Greeks, and were claiming for them Romanitas. No. And it was then a late humanist German scholar who was quite an interesting, very neurotic guy, really with attacks of paranoia, but an interesting man. He discovered the independence somehow of Byzantine literature. And he edited 3 important Byzantine historians, among them Nikitas Choniatis, not in a very good manuscript, in the mid of the 16th century. And he called this for the first time Corpus Historiae Byzantinae. So the German Byzantinist Hans-Georg Beck has written a famous article on this, the father of Byzantine studies, which is not completely true because it begins a bit later. But this is the first time that the classical philologists notice that Byzantine literature is something somehow different from classical Greek literature and call this empire the Byzantine Empire. But this is this becomes more clear in the 17th century with Ducange and the Jesuit Labbe and the others, because the French monarchy actually until the end of the 18th century claimed to have a legitimate claim on the empire of Constantinople, on the Latin Empire. So even today, the Spanish king, because he's a Bourbon, they have a fictitious claim on the Byzantine throne. And with this, Louis XIV, the Roi Soleil, begins in collecting a new Corpus Historiae Byzantinae in the end of the 17th century to underscore his claim on reconquering the Christian East. So this is also very much linked to this French idea that we once had the throne of Byzantium.
Very, very interesting. Gentlemen, I'm going to open up the conversation. Anyone can ask
if I may,
any question that they want.
Suggest, you could do an entire program just on this question of Greek continuity or discontinuity and the terminology.
Sure. I think we'll have a panel discussion on that. That's a great idea. But it's open now. Anyone can ask anybody any questions, whatever you guys want. So please go right ahead. Have an open discussion on anything.
If I may comment on what our Greek-German colleague just stated, I read a long time ago that there was a dispute between Hans-Georg Beck and Vakalopoulos, arguing among them about whether Constantine Palaiologos, the last emperor of Byzantium, was acting as a Greek emperor at the time, following the ideas of Plethon, who was one of the consultants in his court in Mistra, or whether he was following the old tradition of the Roman emperors, which came down to the Byzantine emperors. That concerning the failed campaign of 1446, when Constantine Palaiologos went out of the Peloponnese trying to reconquer southern Greece for the Byzantines, which at the time was consisted of the Latin states, the remainder of the Latin states. And that, of course, ended tragically when the Ottomans under Murad II, Sultan Murad II, went south in the southern Greece and invaded the Byzantine province of Peloponnese for the first time on a large scale and made it tributary to the Turks. Anyway, it's an issue which not even Byzantinists have really come to terms. Vakalopoulos, of course, was in view of the idea that Palaiologos was acting as a Greek emperor, really, not as a Byzantine. And that clicks, if you like, with the idea of the continuity of the Greek nation as expressed by Constantine Paparigopoulos, that in the context of which the fall of Constantinople and the heroic death of Constantine Palaiologos is a stepping stone between the medieval Hellenism and the modern Hellenism, if you like. Personally, I used to agree with Vakalopoulos if it makes any, if it and concerns anyone, but lately I've come to believe that it would be rather improbable for an emperor coming from a long line of descendants of Roman emperors, such as were the Byzantines, or claiming that they were, to renounce openly his previous titles, if you like, age-old titles, for the sake of embracing the sort of Neo-Hellenic identity as expressed by Plethon and his circle. Anyway, that's my idea. I just wanted to bring it out for the sake of our audience.
And Nico, he also, at the same time that you're referring to, liberated a portion of central Greece.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
I always focus on central Greece, as you know.
Now, maybe if I may say something, one should consider that in the mid of the 15th century, Plethon was not the only one, but there were very few highly educated intellectual circles. No, the big majority, the greater majority of the people, even in the 19th century, were considering themselves as Romai or Romai. And Vakalopoulos had a tendency, Hans-Georg Beck was a Byzantinist, he was not a professor for modern Greek studies. Vakalopoulos had a tendency of demonization of the Ottomans. So for him, it is the survival of the Greek nation with or without Konstantinos Palaiologos into the modern Greek nation. The same is with Paparigopoulos, but who was from Istanbul, by the way. But for all these people, you have 500 years of darkness. What happened to the Greek people during these 500 years of Ottoman rule, where is still even in modern Greek consciousness, though we have Ottomanists in Greece finally, but they don't touch this topic. Very interesting. They write a lot about the villages in Chalkidiki, but they don't touch this topic. In the 18th century, when among the Greek Illuminists, from the time of the Lumière, the Aphotismos, they began to conceive a modern Greek nation state. The emperor of Rome was the Ottoman Sultan.
Yes.
You have even in Istanbul, in the entrance of a Catholic, interestingly enough, Catholic church on the Istiklal Caddesi, the Grand Rue de Pera, you have an inscription by the Ottoman Sultan, actually the last strong Ottoman Sultan, Abdulhamid, who claims in this Latin inscription, nota bene in Latin, to be the Imperator Romanorum, to be the Roman emperor. This is famous. So for the 18th, 19th century, Greeks, the Rum, also the Mehmed the Conqueror called himself Автοκράτορ Romeon, was something different than for Constantine Palaiologos. So the modern Greek revivification of Hellenes is not directly connected to Byzantium. It is a reaction, a trying of getting rid of this Ottoman Byzantine past, which was incorporated by the Orthodox Church. Rigas Phareos was, and you can call him at best, he was a follower of the French Revolution, noto annotaton on, lettre supérieure. So for him, also for Korais, all this Ottoman Byzantine ecclesiastical past, you see this in modern Greek anti-clericalism very well, was more or less the pasta. And this is the reason for the reuse of the word Hellenes. So I cannot, maybe Vakalopoulos was right, but there is no direct continuity. The continuity is transmitted by the Orthodox Church during the 500 years of Ottoman rule.
I would say, if you like, if I may rather, that the Greeks of the pre-revolutionary period, late 18th century perhaps, had to perhaps adopt the idea that Europeans had at the time of direct link between their own time and ancient Greece in order to bring them over to their own cause.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, by the way.
Sure.
There's no doubt about that.
You have Kumas and all these Istanbuli Phanariot families who are conceiving a nation state. Now, interestingly enough, the Turks in the 19th century do just the same. No, they try to get rid, with the Kemalists, to try to get rid of the Ottoman Islamic past. For them, the Ottoman sultans were the traitors of the Turkish nation. This is why they had this idea that they come directly from the steppes of Central Asia to write against Istanbul, which is completely fantastic. It is just the same idea like the Germans tried to get rid in the 19th century of the Austro-Hungarian German Empire of Catholic faith, by the way, to get directly back to Hermann the Cheruskian. This is all mythology.
It is very interesting. If I may say something on this, because all these ideological schemes are very complicated, and we have many factors in this and many contributors. For example, most of the people, and I believe a large part of the literature also, underestimates the contribution of the German historiography of the early 19th century, which contributed in the construction of this scheme of the tripartite Hellenism, Zinkeisen and this thing, which came from Germany and was adopted by people like Zambelios and Paparikopoulos. So we have some links, but it is very interesting just to show that these are really complicated, that at the time of the revolution of 1821, we have a tendency of many of the people who, of the revolters, that they wanted to reestablish the state of their pious emperors.
Sure, of course.
And it is very important, because it is not something which only shows the ancient part, the ancient past, but it is the Byzantine past which is present in another way, as it is somehow evaluated at the time. So I believe it's a big issue, and it's really interesting. And in Vakalopoulos' view, it has to do exactly with 1204. This is the beginning, according to Vakalopoulos' view. This is the beginning for New Hellenism, and this is at this point there are different views. I have recently studied on how, for example, Nikos Voronos was not convinced at all by this distinction, and showed that this birth of New Hellenism, a new category, he does not really comply with Paparikopoulos, but it is the birth of New Hellenism has to do, according to Voronos, with the 11th century. So it is really big issue how this New Hellenism, according to many important historians, coming from different ideological schemes, ideological parts, think that the birth of the New Hellenism has to do with the last phase of Byzantium. I find it very interesting, and perhaps it's a good issue for
another discussion.
Another panel.
Another panel discussion. Absolutely. I think we're going to start to wrap it up. So if we can, let's start with some final thoughts, and we'll start with Constantine. Some final thoughts on today's session, which quite frankly was extremely fascinating, very fascinating. And thank you all. Please, Constantine.
I didn't hear very much from my colleagues, my distinguished colleagues, about localism, but perhaps that's a topic for another time. On Nikos's point on Constantine Palaiologos, if I remember correctly, my old friend Marios Philippidis wrote a very detailed study on Constantine, and he brings up, if I remember correctly, that Constantine was not crowned in St. Sophia, so he didn't follow the traditional path. So that speaks to the legitimacy question, or the continuity question of imperial tradition. The second item that I'd like to mention is that I was fascinated by what Professor Panagiotidis said about Byzantine literature and having its origin and great influence by the West and Western prototypes. When I studied the origins of Demotic Greek literature and Byzantine literature, it was pointed out to me that the Acritic cycle was one of the earliest. The Ptochodromika were others, the Ballad of Armuris, and so on and so forth. These predate these Western prototypes. So I was wondering how his knowledge is much deeper than mine on literature. So I'd like to get his view on that.
Now, if I just may answer to this, the oldest manuscript of the acritic cycle is after 1204. So we can assume that the Ioannis Akritas existed as an oral epic before 1204, but we have only one verse, and this verse is by Theodoros Prodromos, but in his Katharevousa poems, where he compares the Byzantine Emperor Manuel to Osan Ketis Akritis. So you can assume that in the 12th century there was an oral tradition, but it was not written down. And there is good indication that writing down, well, this is, by the way, this manuscript is kept in Cryptopheri, in Grotta Ferrata, it is kept in Italy, not in the former Byzantine Empire. That writing down the tradition on the Ioannis Akritas was an imitation of the Chanson de Roland. You need a hero who fights for the true faith. So you dig up your Byzantine past, and you find this, by the way, adulterer, very of Arabic origin, and so on. But there is no the Ioannis Akritas text, attested before the 14th century. And about Theodoros Prodromos, we have the Prodromica. Nobody knows by whom they were written. But if you say it is by Theodoros Prodromos, so we are already in the 12th century, and if you look closer to them, the poems themselves, they are in Katharevousa. Of course, he was a learned man, whoever this Ptoloprodromos was. Only when he satirizes himself, or he satirizes his quite notorious wife, Imatsukina, then he gives some verses in demotic. But if this was really written in the 12th century, so if it was really written by the original Theodoros Prodromos, God alone knows. They are anonymous. In the end, if you are really critical, you have to admit they are anonymous poems whose oldest manuscripts are also from the 14th century. You cannot prove it. If what you really can prove that the oldest text you have in Demotic Greek is probably the Chronikon του Moreos. This is after 1204.
That's true, absolutely. Thank you so much, John, for that, Yanni, for that response. Ilias, some final thoughts, questions, ideas, future panels?
Yeah, I believe that I have learned many things, and I have made many notes while attending these important contributions by the colleagues. And I believe that this is really important, this panel. I'd like to point out that nothing is the same after 1204.
Yeah.
Nothing will never be the same again. It's something which is cataclysmic, dramatic changes all over. And I'd also like to remind that I totally agree with what Yannis mentioned regarding Hellenes and the emergence of this name after 1204. The first emperor after 1204 used this term to address to his people. They were not Romans anymore, they were Greeks. And it is very important because it is clearly a reaction to this Italy who had been present everywhere, and they were very near. But this is something which after 1261 somehow gets forgotten and comes again, I believe, in the 14th and the 15th centuries with the contribution of people like Platon, who and other scholars who were not so separate, their activities were not so separate from the imperial circle and the imperial will.
Thank you, Ilya. And I think that's an important discussion, by the way, which we should have, because this is something that's discussed a lot and continuously, the whole concept of Hellenes and the use of the word and all the rest of that. So I think that's probably going to be a future panel discussion. Nico, some final thoughts, ideas, questions?
Yes, well, I was just thinking that we haven't really said practically anything about what happened in northern Greece as concerning the Franks there and their interaction with other populations like the Albanians, the Serbs, especially in areas like Thessaly or Epirus, which are sort of buffer zones. We have constant interactions of Italians, Greeks, Albanians, later Serbs, Catalans from the south when the Catalan Duchy of Athens was active, and so on. So there you have a completely different set of circumstances even before the arrival of the Ottomans. I won't go any further because it's a big issue, but one has to take into consideration as one of the side effects of the Fourth Crusade, perhaps the arrival of the Albanians, the Arvanites in southern Greece, which was not an direct effect, but definitely one of the side effects. Or perhaps the short-lived expansion of the Serbian empire of Stefan Dusan in the 14th century. That wouldn't have been that would have been formed if it wasn't for the fragmentation of the Balkan provinces of the Byzantine Empire, and so on and so forth. But that's again another big issue for perhaps a different panel discussion.
I think we need that discussion. Listen, Costa, can you whip up those maps again that we had in the beginning? I'll just make a couple of statements on this. Okay, are you there, Costa? Okay, not the first map. Go to the second one, I think, or maybe the third one. No, the third one. Yeah. So here we have, as you see in the map, up in the northern end. Okay, the Serbians coming in, and then you see also the Albanian despots. If you look on top of the map, on the left, you'll see the Serbian despots, and you'll also see the Florentine despots up above Yanina.
Yeah, the Orsinis there, and the Toki, and then you've got the Puas and the Spartas in the western Greece.
We have to have this discussion. This is an important discussion, not right now, but we have to have that discussion, Nico. And thank you for bringing that up. Costa, you can take down the maps now. Yanni, some final thoughts, ideas, concepts?
No, actually, with the Albanians, I should have said this too. No, the most important political state or domination for the rising of the Albanian nation, which is not well studied, is northwestern Greece, the so-called Despotaton tis Epirou, which is, by the way, the wrong name, because the Albanians until then were integrated into the Byzantine Empire as allies. But with the breakdown of 1204, they begin to get independent.
Very, very important point. Very, very important point. And we have to have this discussion because it obviously, as Nico stated, it relates to the Balkans, which we, into modern times, So I think that's going to be a discussion for the future. Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, everybody of you knows the modern airport of Athens, no? Which is Sparta, no? And like all Attiki, it is they are all Arvanitochoria. But not too many Greeks know that Sparta is one of these early families who were attested in the 13th century after the Fourth Crusade in the hinterland of the still Byzantine-dominated cities of later Albania. And we have the tombstones of one of these members of the family of Sparta, Din Bua Sparta, Din is Giannis, whose tombstone, and now you can guess in which language it is written. It is in Greek, Church Slavonic, and Latin. Not one word in Albanian.
So this was Bua, you said?
Yeah, Gin Bua Sparta.
Yeah. Okay, this is very interesting. Okay, to the audience, this has been a fascinating discussion. This panel is spectacular, quite frankly, in terms of their knowledge. Obviously, we can be speaking for hours on this particular topic, and maybe we will come back to it in the future and go a little bit more in depth. For those of you who are in Athens, we will be having an event, a live event this time in Athens on September the 29th. It's called the Hellenic-Japanese Relations.
26.
I'm sorry, 26. I'm sorry, the 20. I'm glad you corrected me. The 26th of September. It's called the Hellenic-Japanese Relations from Lafcadio Hearn to the Toki Maru. There's limited seating there because of the venue, so you can go on the EMBCA website and basically be able to come in until we close it down when we basically are going to be filled. So it's going to be a very interesting thing. At that event, I'm going to give the EMBCA Humanitarian Award to the Japanese ambassador of Greece, relating to the humanity and also the courage of the captain and the crew of the Toki Maru. It was a Japanese merchant ship that when they came into port, or they were coming into port when Smyrna was burning, they unloaded their very valuable cargo and took in Greeks and Armenians and brought them back to Greece to safety. So it's going to be a very interesting event for those who are in Athens on September 26th. Now, September 26th is also the day where Lafcadio Hearn died in 1904. So this is also the 120th anniversary of the passing of Lafcadio Hearn. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to this fabulous
hey, have a good evening to everybody. Kalinichta.
Kalinichta to all. Thank you so much.
Kalinichta.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.